"I want to humiliate him. They can't ignore me," shouts Andy, enraged. "How?" inquires the GM. "I raise my voice and insult him in front of the entire party. I use my conspicuous skill." Roll. Your obstacle is 3 to gain the attention of the crowd and be heard. Extra successes will go towards incensing them with the spectacle. 4 successes. Your insults are heard flung across the room. Some eyebrows are raised. He stops walking away from you and turns, red in the face. It seems you have a moment in which you are the centre of attention. In the example, the player states his intent and task straight away. Humiliate his opponent using shouts and insults, while testing his conspicuous skill. The GM embellishes on the result with the successful test. The target is humiliated and the GM tells the player how. Failure. When the dice are rolled and don't produce enough successes to meet the obstacle, the character fails. What does this mean? It means the stated intent does not come to pass. I pick the lock quickly before the guards come. This is an easy intent to judge a failure for. The character doesn't get the lock open. Simple, right? But what if that's changed a bit? Failure doesn't have to mean the lock doesn't open. Look at the intent. Before the guards come. What if the character opens the lock just as the guards arrive? Suddenly you have trouble, drama, and action. 2 directions. When a player sets out a task for his character and states his intent, it is the GM's job to inform him of the consequences of failure before the dice are rolled. "If you fail this," should be heard often at the table. Let the players know the consequences of their actions. Failure is not the end of the line, but it is complication that pushes the story in another direction. Once that is said, everyone knows what's at stake and play can continue smoothly, no matter what result the roll is. Failure complicates the matter. When a test is failed, the GM introduces a complication. You can try to pick the lock, but you don't have much time. It is highly likely that the guards will return before you finish. Try not to present flat negative results. You don't pick the lock. Strive to introduce complications through failure as much as possible. Death should only be the result of a failure in the rarest, most dire situations. The GM must present the players with varied, twisted, occult and bizarre ramifications of their decisions. Death is only the last resort, and more often than not, a player will let everyone know when he is prepared to risk his character's life for success. Lastly, the rules for specific subsystems like fighting, injury and sorcery will guide you through adjudicating the severity of a failure result. Let it ride. One of the most important aspects of ability tests in gameplay in Burning Wheel is the Let It Ride rule. A player shall test once against an obstacle and shall not roll again until conditions legitimately and drastically change. Neither GM nor player can call for a retest unless those conditions change. Successes from the initial roll count for all applicable situations in play. A GM cannot call for multiple rolls of the same ability to accomplish a player's stated intent. Nor can a player retest a failed roll simply because he failed. Tests must be distilled down to as few rolls as possible. The successes of those rolls ride across the entire situation, scene or session. If a player failed a test or generated no successes, the result stands. If he was hot and got 7 successes, those stand for the duration. Time. How long does a test take? Whatever the precise answer is, the time required for a test must be stated before any dice are rolled. Either the GM must inform the player how much time is needed, or a player must state how much time his character is willing to spend. Length of time. Tests in Burning Wheel often mimic real-world counterparts. The game is meant to evoke a living, breathing world, so there are hours, days, nights, seasons and years to account for as the characters' lives are played out. Using real-world analogies for tests is a good place to start. Listed below are some guidelines for judging time. Length of stat tests. Most stat tests are instantaneous affairs, catching a ball, leaping a ditch, or noticing a shadow. Some stat tests are longer affairs, climbing a cliff face, escaping from bindings, moving a boulder. Generally, the latter type takes minutes to hours to accomplish. The exact interval of time is up to the GM. Academic. Time for academic skill tests falls into 2 categories. Either instantaneous recall of a subject based on a successful skill test representing character knowledge, or time spent on research. Research requires days at minimum, but often spans months and years. Artist. Artistic skills like painting and sculpture require time in weeks. Sometimes they can be expanded into years for particularly ambitious tests. Craftsman. Time for tests of skills like blacksmithing, weaver and carpenter are measured in days and weeks. It takes a day to make a batch of horseshoes. It takes a few weeks to make a mail shirt. Forester. Forest skill tests, stealthy, tracking, hunting, orienteering, etc., are measured in minutes, hours and occasionally days. Martial. Martial skill tests are nearly all sudden actions. Medicinal. Medicinal skill tests, surgery, field dressing, herbalism, bloodletting, etc., are measured in minutes and hours. These times are described in detail in the Anatomy of Injury section. Military. Military skills, strategy, tactics, logistics, skirmish training and formation fighting training generally follow the same guidelines as the academic and physical tests to which they are cousins. Musical. Musical composition takes weeks and months to perfect. Musical performance takes as long as it takes. Peasant. Peasant skills are varied and complex, from animal husbandry to farming. One thing they all hold in common is that they take a while. Farming is a seasonal affair. Animal husbandry tests span a few hours to a few years. However, in play, peasant skills can be used in the short term to determine why a crop died or calm a frightened animal. These tests usually take just a few minutes. Physical. Physical skills like climbing are very situational. Usually the time of the task is based on how far the character has to go. Use common sense. Schools of thought. Doctrine and philosophy tests obey the same rules as academic skills. Seafaring. Seafaring skills, rigging, knots, navigation, obey the same rules as peasant skills. Some tests take days or weeks, others only a few moments. Social. In Burning Wheel, a social skill test is made for a single interaction. This is heavily dependent on role-playing, but these tests can require a few moments' banter or hours of negotiation. Sorceress. Times for sorceress skills are discussed in the sorcery section. Special miscellaneous. For skills that fall in the special miscellaneous category, use the closest analogue from the list above. Breaking up a test. If the GM feels a test is going to take an inordinate amount of time, but the bits and pieces can be accomplished separately, he can break up the results of a test. Only one roll is made, but the GM then parcels out the results across the allotted time. The character may lead and return to the test as appropriate, each time gaining the next set of results. A young lady has found an ancient elvish text. The GM tells the player that it will take many months to read. The player passes her reading test and digs into the tome. Each session, the GM gives the player another clue to the content of the volume, describing facets of elven history and lore. Time and failure. A character must spend the same time failing a test as succeeding it. Even when the character fails, he doesn't always know. If he missed by a lot, completely messed it up, he can then give up right away and not lose too much time. Time and play. Meanwhile. If a player undertakes a test that's going to occupy his character for a couple of hours, other players have a few hours to kill with their characters. The GM turns to the next player and says, "Meanwhile, what are you going to do?" Keep going around the table like this, allowing players to fill the gaps of downtime with stuff like research, exploration, scouting, practice, etc. They can undertake activities that can be resolved with a roll or two, and that can be narrated to have occupied the in-game time frame. Help. Players may have their characters help one another in the game. When two or more characters are acting together, only one player rolls. His character is considered the primary character for the test. He accepts much of the risk, though he shares the reward.